Hello, everyone. Good morning. Okay, so the book that I have to give the presentation on, the name is Pedagogy, Power and Discourse, Transformation of Islamic Education. And the author is Aziz Talbani. Um, all right, so a brief introduction about the author. He's a Pakistani, got his MA from Karachi University, MA from London, and further PhD and MA from McGill University. His area of education is mostly education, and his area of writing is also religion and education. Um, these are two of his books that he wrote in 2016, one on Imam Hussein and the other Journey with Muhammad. Um, okay, so regarding this paper, this article, so this article was published in 1996 by University of Chicago printing press, and this article basically discusses education or the evolution of this of education in Islam and the madrasa system, especially because um, it constituted the education mostly through the early periods of Islam and the later periods. And the focus shifts from the whole Muslim community, the worldwide Muslim countries, to subcontinent, especially Pakistan, in the later pages of his article. So he has taken references from various books and authors. Most of them are um, English authors. What I mean is Western authors. One frequent reference is taken from Pervez Hoodboy. He's a very famous Pakistani physicist who is famous for giving um, um, views on religion more often than not. Anyways, so the theme of his this article is basically the Islamization movements, how Muslims and the Muslim community, especially the state or the clergy, the people who were responsible for the religious thought, their response to modernity, and these movements, um, they actually wanted to combine all forms of knowledge with Islamic values. They wanted to infuse Islamic values into different secular subjects. And so the idea was to prevent secularization and modernization of knowledge. All right, so the idea of these movements was to create a political struggle to establish a discourse in their favor. They wanted to join state and religion both and create a new power structure where the religion and state were not separate. So historically, the Muslim societies, the control was with the religious community, and the religious community controlled the society and the social structure, and even the government had to be approved by the religious community or ulama, and the use of Islamic education to reproduce specific discourses of power. So that was very prevalent, and he has used Pakistan as a case study. Yeah. So yeah, initially he defines Islamization. So he calls Islamization as the source of power and social control. Um, and so one of the author that he references from says that Islam is a complete and comprehensive way of life, something where many Muslims also call Islam to be. And in Muslim countries, there's like there's one specific type of knowledge that is revealed, and the other is traditional knowledge. And so both of these knowledge are considered priori knowledge that is acquired independently of any particular experience. So revealed, that was revealed on the prophet, so that was a priori knowledge. So the idea for education is that it will reproduce Islamic culture, and the Islamist transformation is the idea to control the shift of people, of the masses, from capitalism to elsewhere. So the idea of Islamization is to have that control, and for that they're using the discourse, and they call it. The author calls discourse an instrument of power, starting point for an opposing strategy. Education Islamization will oppose modern capitalist power structure. Um, yeah, importance for education and social institutions is basis for any power struggle. Then he tells that in Islam, Quran is the main source of knowledge, the core of knowledge, primary source of knowledge, and that with the change in time and place, this cannot invalidate the Quranic junctions or the uh, rules and regulations given by the Quran. And the power of legitimacy, it's basically certain people have this power, people who interpret Quran, and therefore in Islamization the political power lies in the control of those people who control interpretation and the discourse, and the religious groups really want to use these weapons to have that control. Tradition learning Islam. So before the advent of Islam, before Islam came into Arabia, there was no education system in the Arab world. After Islam came, we started having the Muslims started having congregational Friday prayers in the mosque, where it used to be the mosque used to be the social and cultural center at the time. So the learning or um, the education sort of institute, it was the first education institute in a way. People used to learn and memorize Quran, they used to learn the prophet's tradition, they used to learn biographical narratives from the prophet. There were other subjects too, but for the other subjects the curriculum wasn't fixed, and often you had to hire private teachers who had their own syllabi, and often you had to travel for education. In fact, as a religion, Islam encouraged people to travel to get education if they want to get a better education somewhere far away. And then we have the advent of madrasa. Madrasa, it is emerged as a place of the little meaning is a place of learning, and it was madrasa was actually the initial schools in Islamic history. Those were called the madrasa. So these were center for organized learning. So before it was not that much organized. So in madrasa, other subjects were also taught in addition to the basic subjects like Quran, tradition, jurisprudence, and Arabic language. But the all other forms of knowledge, they were like not all the forms of knowledge were patronized by the madrasa. So according to the author, some areas where if someone wanted to study some particular fields, they had to uh, do in disguise of other subjects like medicine, which were allowed. And so I had this thought in my mind that if that really was the case, Ibn Sina was a Muslim chemist, how did he learn chemistry? I mean, was he in, I don't know. Anyway, the discourse of knowledge in madrasa, the initial objective of education in madrasa was that you get to have this bliss in hereafter, the life after you die. And for that bliss, the only way is a religious knowledge. You could learn other subjects, but they are not really necessary. And then the author has given types of reference of Al Ghazali, who said there are two types of knowledge. They're revealed, there's acquired, then revealed is priori knowledge, and acquired knowledge have has two types: transmitted and rational. And then there's desirable and undesirable knowledge, and undesirable knowledge constitutes of subjects like ancient knowledge and philosophy. Again, I had a small disagreement that if that was the case, if that was so prevalent, then how come we have so many Muslim philosophers in those 9th, 10th, 11th centuries? Anyways, approved form of knowledge were to be acquired only to necessary for survival, while research inquiry uh, would be discouraged. So that is what he interpreted from Al Ghazali. Um, Although I would not interpret it this way, but yeah, those who interpret have the ultimate power. Anyways, these classification made jurists and muhaddis, the people who used to interpret the Prophet's, learn and interpret the Prophet's tradition, the final authorities. And the religious scholars actually then became the guardians of the religious knowledge. And then we had some concepts which were really encouraged and promoted, like taqleed, that you have to follow an imam or a religious scholar without any question. And inquiry and research were often discouraged, according to the author. And then we have traditional Islamic pedagogy, according to the author, where he says that we have authoritative acceptance of knowledge. learning based on listening and memorization mostly. And he gives example of Quran, which is listened. Well, according to him, Quran means that something which is listened. Education became static in the 12th century, and teachers were actually licensed to teach particular books, so that created the sort of a monopoly and control over education. And mm, yeah, so according to the author, outside in the world, everything was changing, but inside the madrasa or the learning institutions in the Muslim world, everything was static. The consequences were that Muslims, they became really apathetic towards the scientific and philosophical matters. They would get, as far away as possible from those subjects, and the consequence of that was that they soon they were lagging behind in nearly every field that was present, and they wanted the religious and moral framework to engulf all the matters, but that wasn't coming out too good. And then there are two references that Islamic learning is based on central body of knowledge which was of divine origin. That's what author thinks was happening. Thus, pedagogical discourse produced by the madrasa became an effective device for social control and resulted in an educational stagnation that still persists. So that educational stagnation that he think started in the 19th century in the madrasa, that is still persists till today, according to the author. Okay, so then we have a state control on and madrasa. So these both institutions were really linked together. Uh, that was because madrasa was, although had control over the discourse and the education, but it relied heavily on the elites and the government for political and financial support. And so the government used the madrasa and madrasa used the government, and mostly the state would use the power of finance and political support um, uh, to have their own choice of discourse from the madrasa, and so it became a tool of containment of social and ideological structure both by the state and by the madrasa, where each of them could gain some control. And so the state had this strategy that it would help some madrasas and it would neglect some others based on the ideas that they liked, or maybe some madrasas would um, oppose state, so they were neglected and like that. And the idea was also to tell masses that the government is being supported by the madrasa, meant the ulema or the Muslim religious scholars, so it gave the government a legitimization uh, and a way to control masses, obviously. And so it's again a quotation: to be a Muslim meant to identify oneself with symbols of social obedience and to extend loyalty to traditional authority systems. Result: the imposition of colonial rule created a serious threat to religiously oriented identities and loyalties. So basically, Muslims were used to following the state because the state was linked with the madrasa, which was their religious uh, leading institution. And so once that that ended, it was very hard for Muslims to understand the system. The colonial rule was a real threat. Okay, so madrasa and modernity. Before this point, the author was discussing about the Muslim world in general. After this point, he has shifted his focus to subcontinent or Pakistan. So he talks about that after colonialism brought modernity, the madrasa, and obviously no government, no Muslim government. So madrasa lost the control it previously had. And so because the madrasa told Muslims too, the Muslims started resisting the secular and modern education. And so the madrasa had to change its focus. So they started saying that the madrasa will now defend the faith against the colonial rule. Uh, Although the content and pedagogy, the way it was taught, everything was taught remained the same. And so, according to the madrasa, the post-colonial era traditionalist Western secular education promotes similarity. And so, after Pakistan was born, Pakistan became an area where we had this fight between modernist and the traditionalist people. Uh, so, after Pakistan came into being, the fundamentalist. This is a word often used by the writer. He hasn't really defined it. Uh, and so, according to him, fundamentalists saw state as an Islamic state Although, according to the author, most government members were mostly people who had studied from the West and they were not fundamentalist. Okay. Uh, so, sympathy towards Islam among modernists was a political tool to cool off militant tendencies. So, this is his very serious personal opinion. He has not given any reference to this. Then he has given two examples of Pakistani governments taking measures which were related to Islamization. Uh, but according to him, the main difference between, for example, Bhutto, who made some Islamization measures, and Zia, was that for Bhutto it was not a choice. It was something that he was forced to do. For Zia, it was something that he really wanted to happen. Um, and then he gives two or three paragraphs to talk about what Zia did during his regime. Okay, so after that, he's talked about pedagogy in Islam. So he's talked about that very recently there was a conference held in Mecca, the holy city of Muslims, which was attended, according to him, mostly by the fundamentalist and traditionalist Muslims. And they talked about how to use education to change from Western education present back to the Islamic education, which was there from before. So these traditionalists viewed education as a means to create an Islamized society. For traditionalists, education is not free inquiry but an extension of theological learning. Modern science is guided by no moral values but naked materialism and arrogance. That is what traditionalists would think, according to the author. Divorced from faith is not only partial knowledge; it can be even be described as a new kind of ignorance. Traditionalists believe education is based on ethical and religious foundation. Only jurists are allowed to develop Islamic education system. All right. Then there is crisis of legitimacy for science. He has talked about that how science lost its legitimacy or would because of this Islamization. So the fundamentalist discourse was that science is an Western ideological tool, and that ideally for fundamentalist all subjects should reflect Islamic beliefs and values, and so therefore, the conference in Mecca and all the traditionalists believe that there needs to be a change in the pedagogy and the curricula of the education institutes, and there should be a fusion of Islamic values into secular subjects, and there was a need to Islamize the Western science. So there are two quotes from the article. As a result of this understanding, science at all levels is taught conservatively with critical and analytical methodology absent. That is Pervez Woodboy. I don't agree, but yeah. Scientific knowledge develops critical thinking and avoids the uncritical acceptance of traditional answers to human inquiry. All right, political construction of historical discourse. So then he also talks about how history has been modified, and so we studied this in PAMSA and in other courses how history was modified for the sake of uh, the state of Pakistan, the government did it, or um, over here he has related that again to the fundamentalist and the traditionalist people and the Islamist people, and he says that because those people thought that the history of Pakistan, it lies in the Islamic ideology, and it was born on the basis of religion. Um, well, and so according to him, and that Ali Jinnah, Muhammad Ali Jinnah was a secular leader, but was portrayed as an Islamic leader, or a leader with religious views by the traditionalist. And then he gave examples how history books were given the wrong impression that Muslims of India were outsiders and they were not people who actually lived there and converted to Islam. And and so, according to him, Pakistan was not an ideological Islamic state, but a secular nation state, according to Ali Jinnah. Also, in the history books that we have today, in the government history books at least, there's a lot of highlighting of the ulama, glorifying the army, because these are the two groups who have the ultimate control, and any other control has to be legitimized by them. I would somehow agree with this. This needs to happen in Pakistan. Okay, so conclusion is that he sums up by saying that in past Islamic discourse excluded non-Islamic knowledge. So It focused only on the knowledge that was related to the revealed knowledge and the traditional knowledge, and the other knowledge was considered auxiliary. And in the present, however, the traditionalists have somehow tried to fuse all the different domains of life with Islamic discourse. Um, and the reason why Islamization has been so famous that it is that it is sort of an alternative to capitalist system. Failure of secular government also plays a hand in the fame of Islamization, and some experiments, according to the author again, have shown Islamic ideology has also failed. And the reason for this that he gives is that ulama never reached consensus what constitute Islamic education, etc. Um, okay. Emphasis on ideological education has intensified cultural and religious differences. So, according to him, if he would continue with this ideological education, it would intensify cultural and religious differences. And but uh, he thinks that people in Pakistan are really resisting towards this discourse of madrasa and ulama because people are going after English medium schools and other Western modern schools. Um, Thank you.